The new HOA president hated my garden. He was a young man, full of new power, and he called my husband's life's work a messy collection of weeds. He fined me $500. Then he fined me $2,000. He held a public meeting right on my front lawn to shame me, threatening to have it all ripped out. He thought he was just enforcing the rules. He had no idea he was trying to destroy the last surviving specimens of plants that were thought to be extinct. The sound started every Saturday at 9. It was a buzzing drone that came from all sides, rising and falling. The sound of my neighbors cutting their grass. From my porch, I could see them. Identical green carpets, ruler straight edges, not a single yellow dandelion. My yard was different. I knelt in the soft dirt, the smell of damp earth and crushed leaves rising around me. My gloves were old, the leather stained dark from years of work. I was tending to a small, unassuming shrub near the walkway. Its leaves were a pale, silvery green, and it was covered in tiny white flowers that looked like little stars. My late husband, Julian, had loved this one. "Look closely, Alara," he used to say, his voice always quiet with discovery. "It's a world all its own." A shadow fell over me. I looked up, shielding my eyes from the sun. A man stood on my walkway. He was young, maybe in his 30s, wearing a bright white polo shirt and holding a clipboard. He looked clean. His shoes were polished. He didn't say hello. "Mrs. Vance," he said. His voice was flat and had no warmth. I took off one glove and slowly got to my feet. My knees always clicked on the way up. "Yes, I'm Chad Miller, the new HOA president." He tapped the clipboard with a pen. "I'm conducting my first community review, and your yard is a problem." I looked at my garden. The tall grasses swayed. Bees moved slowly between the strange purple flowers and the feathery white ones. It was full of life. "It's a native garden, Mr. Miller," I said. He made a small, sharp sound. "It's a weed patch, and it's in direct violation of Covenants 12A and 14C, uniformity and maintenance." He spoke the words like they were important laws. "This is how it's meant to be," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "These plants belong here. They don't need much water. They feed the birds." "I don't care what it feeds," Chad said. He took a step closer, and I could smell his soap. "It's an eyesore. It's driving down property values. The board has received multiple complaints." I wondered who had complained. My neighbors always smiled and waved. "This garden was here when the HOA was formed," I said. "My husband planted it." "Then your husband was also in violation," he said, without a pause. "This is your first official notice." He tore a sheet of paper from his clipboard and held it out. His hand was steady. "You have 14 days, he said. 14 days to clear all of this? Native material and install approved sod. If you fail to comply, fines will begin. We will bring this property into alignment." I looked at the paper. It was very white against my dirty glove. I looked back at his face. He seemed to be enjoying this. He had a lot of power, and he was using it. "I won't be clearing it, Mr. Miller," I said. He smiled, but it was just his mouth. His eyes were hard. "Yes, you will. Or we'll have it cleared for you and bill you for the labor. Read the covenants." He turned and walked away. His polished shoes left no marks on my stone path. I stood there for a long time, the paper in my hand. The buzzing of the lawnmowers seemed to get louder. 14 days. I looked at the little shrub with its white star flowers. Julian's work, my work now, a fine. He was threatening to tear it all out. The 14 days came and went. I watered the garden. I pulled a few invasive weeds that tried to creep in from my neighbor's perfect lawn. I sat on my porch in the evenings and listened to the crickets that lived in the tall grasses. I did not clear the yard. I did not install sod. On the 15th day, a letter came. It was in a stiff white envelope with the HOA logo on it. My hands were steady as I opened it. The letter was one page. It was a formal notice of noncompliance. At the bottom, there was a line item. Initial fine, $500. $500. I put the letter on the kitchen counter, next to a basket of cherry tomatoes I had just picked. The red of the tomatoes seemed very bright next to the white of the envelope. I went back outside. 3 days later, another envelope. The same stiff paper. This one said, "Second notice, failure to remediate." The fine was another 500 pounds. Total due 1,000 gauze. I filed this one on top of the first. I had the money. That wasn't the point. The real attack came on Friday. I opened my email in the morning, as I always did. There was a new message from Chad Miller, HOA president. The subject line was, "Community Standards and Property Values." I clicked on it. "Dear neighbors," it began. "It has come to my attention that some residents are choosing to ignore the binding covenants of our community. This is not just a matter of personal taste. It is a matter of our collective investment." I scrolled down. My hands started to feel cold. He had attached pictures. Pictures of my yard. He must have taken them from the sidewalk, maybe early in the morning. He had zoomed in on the feathery grasses and the patch of milkweed, calling them overgrowth and unmanaged blight. "Lot 114, he wrote, "remains in severe violation. This level of non-compliance negatively impacts the curb appeal of the entire street and can lead to a documented reduction in property values. The board is taking all necessary steps to resolve this matter. We appreciate your support as we work to protect our community." I felt my face get hot. He was turning my neighbors against me. He was making my garden, Julian's garden, sound like a disease. I closed the laptop. The silence in my house felt heavy. I spent the afternoon in the study, but I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about that email. A documented reduction in property values. He was trying to make them afraid. That evening, I went to lock my front door. I always check the deadbolt before bed. When I grabbed the doorknob, my fingers brushed against a piece of paper. It was taped to the door. This wasn't a letter. It wasn't in an envelope. It was just a single sheet, folded and stuck right on the wood. I pulled it off. The tape peeled a tiny fleck of my blue paint with it. It was another fine. This one was different. It was on bright pink paper. Final notice. Continued disregard for community standards. I read the words under the glare of the porch light. He had added new violations. Failure to respond to board notices. Accumulation of yard debris. Fine, 2,000 gallons. Total due, 3,000 gallons. At the bottom, Chad had written something by hand in thick black marker. Next step, a vote for forcible remediation. Your neighbors will decide. He had been on my porch. He had stood right here and stuck this to my door. My heart was pounding, a hard, fast rhythm in my chest. He was going to try to make my neighbors vote to destroy my garden. I looked past the pink paper, out into the dark. I couldn't see the colors of the flowers, but I could smell the sweet, earthy scent of the night-blooming phlox. I would not let him. I left the pink notice on the kitchen table. I wouldn't let it chase me out of my own home. That night, I went into Julian's study. The room smelled like old paper and dried leaves. It was the only room Chad Miller hadn't seen. My husband's work was everywhere. Books on soil composition filled the shelves. Wooden frames, plant presses, were stacked neatly on a side table. I sat at the heavy oak desk. I had a task to do. I opened the top of the nearest press, carefully untwisting the wooden wing nuts. I lifted the top board. Inside, layered between sheets of blotting paper, were the specimens I had collected last week. They were flat, dry, and delicate. I picked one up with tweezers. It was one of the small star-shaped white flowers from the shrub by the walkway. Next to me was Julian's field journal. It was a large, heavy book, bound in dark brown leather. His name was embossed on the cover, Dr. Julian Vance. I opened it. The pages were thick and creamy. On every page was his handwriting, small, neat, precise. He used black ink. There were scientific names, dates, and little hand-drawn maps. I turned the pages until I found the one I was looking for. Page 112. Linanthus vansei. My name. He had named it for me. Underneath he had written, first observed, May 10th, 1993, only known cluster. Highly sensitive to soil disturbance. I took the dried flower and placed it carefully into a clear plastic laminating pouch. I slid the pouch into the small laminator on the desk. The machine made a low, warm humming sound as it pulled the sheet through. When it came out the other side, the flower was sealed, protected. This was my real work. This was my promise to Julian. He had found these plants in the wild, in tiny patches of land that were being destroyed by construction. He brought them here one by one. He created a sanctuary when the rest of the world was paving over them. I was not just gardening. I was the curator of his life's work. I went back to the press and took out the next specimen, a feathery piece of grass. I opened the journal to find its page, Andropogon vansei. As I was aligning the grass in its pouch, my computer on the desk chimed. The screen lit up. It was an email. I put the tweezers down. My hands felt steady. I leaned forward to read the screen. The sender was Chad Miller. The subject line was, Emergency Vote. Forcible remediation of Lot 114. I read the body of the email. He was calling a public meeting. Not in the community center. Not in the park. Date, this Wednesday. 5 p.m. Location, the sidewalk in front of Lot 114, in front of my house. He was going to put me on trial on my own front lawn. He wanted to shame me. He wanted my neighbors to watch. I looked at the journal in my hands. I looked at the fragile, dried grass. Then I looked out the dark window toward the garden. He thought it was just a mess. He had no idea what it really was. Wednesday arrived. The air was thick and still. At 4:45, I went out onto my front porch. I sat in the old wooden rocker, my hands folded in my lap. I just sat, and I waited. First, Mrs. Henderson from across the street came out. She pretended to check her mailbox. Then she walked over and stood on the sidewalk, as far from my yard as possible. Then the young couple from 2 doors down, the ones with the baby. They looked at their phones. One by one they came. My neighbors. They gathered in a small, awkward cluster on the public sidewalk. A few stood on the edge of the street. No one looked at me. No one waved. They were all avoiding my eyes. They were here to watch, to be part of the decision. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. At 5 o'clock on the dot, Chad Miller's gray sedan pulled up to the curb. He got out. He was wearing his white polo shirt again, tucked neatly into beige pants. He looked energetic. He went to his trunk and pulled out 2 objects. One was a small portable lectern, the kind that folds up. The other was a black speaker with a microphone. He didn't set them up on the sidewalk. He walked right up my stone path. He stopped halfway between the sidewalk and my front steps, right on my own property. He unfolded the lectern. He placed the speaker on the ground beside it. My heart beat a hard, slow rhythm. He was holding this meeting on my walkway. He wanted me to be a part of the spectacle. He wanted everyone to face me as they voted. I stayed in my chair. I gripped the wooden armrests. I would not let him see me shake. He tested the microphone. A high-pitched whine cut through the quiet. Testing. 1, 2. His voice came out, loud and metallic. It sounded wrong in the quiet neighborhood. He looked at the small crowd. They all looked at him. He had their full attention. Thank you all for coming, he began. He sounded like a politician. This is an important day for our community. It's about standards. It's about protecting our shared investment. He shuffled his papers on the lectern. He looked up, and his eyes met mine. He was standing 20 feet away from me. For weeks, he said, his amplified voice booming across the lawn. The board has tried to work with the owner of Lot 114. He pointed at me. Not at the house, at me. But Mrs. Vance has refused. She has ignored the fines. She has ignored the warnings. She has decided that her personal, messy preferences are more important than the collective investment of this entire community. A few neighbors shifted their feet. Someone coughed. This, Chad said, making a sweeping gesture with his hand, is what happens. This is a blight. This is a collection of weeds. He leaned into the microphone. His voice dropped, but the speaker made it loud and sharp. It is a fire hazard. It is an open invitation to vermin, and it has to stop. Today we vote. We vote to take action. We vote to authorize the board to hire a crew, to clear this mess, and to restore the value of our neighborhood. He looked so sure of himself. He had all the power. I was just an old woman on a porch. I had nothing to say. I could only watch as he prepared to destroy my husband's legacy. Chad was pointing at the tall, feathery grasses near my mailbox. This, he said into the microphone, his voice sharp, is a fire hazard. It's dry, it's uncontrolled. And the vermin, this is an open invitation to rats and snakes. A few neighbors visibly shivered. Mrs. Henderson pulled her cardigan tighter. He was winning. He was making them afraid of my garden. He was making them afraid of me. And so, Chad said, raising his chin, I ask for a vote. All in favor of authorizing the board to forcibly remediate Lot 114. He was interrupted. A car door slammed. We all turned. A dark sedan, polished black, was parked at the curb behind Chad. It wasn't a neighbor's car. It looked official, expensive. A man was getting out of the passenger side. He wore a pressed shirt, no tie, and dark pants. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and a worried look on his face. He was holding a leather briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other, looking at the house numbers. He looked anxious, like he was late for something very important. Chad stopped talking. His mouth was half open. The neighborhood was silent. The only sound was the distant drone of a highway. Excuse me? Chad said. His voice without the microphone was thin. The new man didn't seem to hear him. He looked at his phone, then at my house, then at my garden. His anxious look vanished. It was replaced by something else, confusion, then intensity. He put his phone in his pocket and started walking. He didn't use the sidewalk. He didn't use my stone path. He walked right past Chad's lectern, stepping directly onto my lawn and into the garden. Sir, Chad said, this time into the microphone. Sir, this is private property. The man ignored him. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning everything. He moved past the silver-leafed shrub and went deeper, toward the center of the yard. He stopped. He just froze. His leather briefcase slipped from his fingers. It hit the grass with a soft thud. Then he dropped to his knees. A gasp went through the crowd of neighbors. I gripped the armrests of my rocker, my knuckles white. He was kneeling in front of the patch of small, scrubby purple flowers, the ones Julian had found by the old quarry. The man reached out a hand, but he didn't touch them. He just hovered his fingers over the petals. My God, he whispered. We all heard it. The air was that still. It's real. Chad was bright red. His public meeting, his moment of power, was falling apart. Excuse me, sir? Chad said, trying to sound official. This is a private HOA meeting. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The man stood up. He wasn't fast. He stood up like a man who had just seen something impossible. He turned, brushing the dirt from his knees, but he didn't look at Chad. He looked past the lectern, past the crowd. He looked directly at me, sitting on the porch. His eyes were wide. Are you Alara Vance? He asked. His voice was clear, and it carried across the lawn. It held an authority that Chad's microphone could not match. All the breath left my chest. All my neighbors turned to look at me. Yes, I said. My voice was a croak. The man took a step toward me. Did Julian Vance live here? My heart stopped. He knew Julian. He knew his name. He was my husband, I said. The man nodded, his face a mixture of awe and relief. He turned away from me and faced the crowd. He faced Chad. This man, he said, and he pointed directly at Chad, was just calling this a collection of weeds. His voice was not amplified, but it was so clear and strong that everyone heard him. Chad, still holding his microphone, just stared. Dr. Thorne, I didn't know his name yet, but he looked like a doctor, knelt again by the purple flowers. This, he said, loud enough for all to hear, is Phlox nivalis Vance's, Vance's reclining phlox. My colleagues and I thought it was extinct. It hasn't been seen in the wild in over 30 years. The last known specimen was recorded by Dr. Julian Vance in 1989, right before a wildfire destroyed its only known habitat. A sound moved through the neighbors, a collective, soft gasp. Mrs. Henderson put her hand over her mouth. The man stood and walked to the next plant, the tall, feathery grass that Chad had called a fire hazard. And this, he said, touching the grassy stems with a gentle hand. This is Andropogon vancey. We only knew it from a single dried pressing in our archives. We thought it was gone forever, lost. He turned, his eyes sweeping over the whole yard. He looked like he was in a cathedral. This messy shrub. He walked over and touched the silvery leaves of the plant I had been pruning. The one with the white star flowers. The one Julian had named for me. This is Linanthus Vance's. He looked at the crowd, his face blazing with a kind of scientific passion. Don't you understand? This isn't a garden. It's an ark. It's the last surviving collection of this region's native flora. My department? The National Botanical Gardens. We've been searching for this lost garden ever since Dr. Vance passed away. We thought his notes were just wishes. We didn't think it was real. He finally looked at Chad. His eyes were cold. Chad was the color of paste. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The microphone was useless in his hand. But, Chad stammered. The fines, the covenants, the uniformity, your covenants, the man said. He actually laughed, a short, sharp, disbelieving sound. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. I am the lead curator for the National Botanical Gardens. And as of this moment, this entire property is being placed under the protection of the National Registry of Living Specimens. He took a step toward Chad. Chad actually took a step back, bumping into his own lectern. This garden, Dr. Thorne said, his voice dropping, is a priceless national collection. It is worth more than every house on this street combined. If your landscaping crew or anyone from your HOA touches one stem, one single blade of grass, it won't be a covenant violation. He paused. It will be a federal crime. Chad was silent. He was a statue. The neighbors were silent. They were no longer looking at Chad. They were all looking at my garden. They were looking at it with wonder. They were seeing it for the first time. The silence that followed Dr. Thorne's words was absolute. It was heavier than any sound I had ever heard in this neighborhood. The distant highway drone, the rustle of leaves, everything seemed to have stopped. Chad Miller stood frozen. His hand, still holding the useless microphone, slowly lowered to his side. The bright red flush was gone from his face. He was pale, a sickly white. He looked at Dr. Thorne, then at the neighbors. He looked at the garden, his eyes empty. He had built his power on curb appeal and property values, and that power had just been completely dismantled. Dr. Thorne turned his back on Chad. He walked over to me, stopping at the bottom of my porch steps. His face was no longer angry. It was kind. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice quiet now. Ilara, your husband. He was a legend to us, a ghost. We read his papers, but we could never find him. He stopped publishing. We thought he had given up. He never gave up, I said. My voice was thick. He just brought them home. He said it was the only safe place left. He was right, Dr. Thorne said. He looked over his shoulder at the garden. He built an ark. The neighbors were not leaving. They were moving. Slowly, one by one, they stepped off the sidewalk. They crept onto my lawn. Mrs. Henderson, who had complained about vermin, was the first. She bent down, her knees popping, to look at the small purple phlox. She didn't touch it. She just looked, her eyes wide. The young man from 2 doors down was pointing at the silvery shrub. "I've never seen a flower like that," he whispered to his wife. "It looks like a star." They were finally seeing it. They were walking through the garden, quiet and respectful, as if they were in a museum. They were pointing out the bees, the strange seed pods, the colors they had never noticed. Chad Miller was the only one not looking at the garden. He was looking at his lectern. With a stiff, mechanical motion, he began to pack. He folded the legs of the lectern. He unplugged the microphone. He carefully wound the black cord around his hand. He did it all in that terrible, heavy silence. No one watched him. All eyes were on the plants. Dr. Thorne saw my gaze. He looked at Chad, then back at me. "I'll need to see his notes, if you still have them. We will need to create a preservation plan. This place is vital." "They're inside," I said. "In his study." "Thank you." He smiled at me, a real smile. "You've done an incredible job, Ilara. You've saved them all." I watched as Chad snapped his lectern case shut. He picked it up along with the speaker. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Dr. Thorne. He kept his eyes on the ground. He walked his walk of shame down my stone path, got into his gray sedan, and drove away. The emergency meeting was over. The neighbors slowly drifted away, one by one, talking in low, hushed tones. They waved at me as they left. Not the quick, polite waves I was used to. These were real waves, waves of respect. Later, after Dr. Thorne had seen the study and held Julian's field journal in his hands, he left. He promised to return the next day with a team. That evening the sun began to set. The air cooled. The buzzing of the lawnmowers was long gone. I picked up my old watering can from the porch. I walked down the steps and onto the grass. I went to the patch of Phlox nivalis vansei. I tilted the can, and the water made a soft sound as it hit the dark earth. I moved to the Andropogon vansei, the tall, feathery grass. I gave it water. Then I went to the shrub by the walkway, the one with the white star flowers. I watered its roots, my hand steady. The garden was quiet, safe. It was Julian's legacy, and it was my home.